Dr. Joshua Coleman, for those of you who may not remember, is the person who wrote the book that Diane tried to read. Diane said she could not get through the book because it required too much contrition. To get through the book, she had to admit that it was her fault, and she wasn't ready to do that. So instead, she started a YouTube channel dedicated to why it wasn't her fault, and instead it was the fault of her daughter, and then your daughter, and then the rest of your kids, and then everyone but her and you. It's not your fault. You were a great parent.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you again. Tonight's topic is on the 5 most common mistakes of estranged and alienated parents. And I realized as I wrote it, there's actually a bonus mistake in there for everybody who wants to know if they've made even more mistakes.
I don't know a lot about Dr. Josh Coleman. I did see him on Dr. Phil once, and he was kind of a weird dude, but he's also like the one keeping the peace. So like anyone else, right? He's a person full of ideas. Some are probably wrong. Some are probably right. And he hopefully has enough experience and knowledge to have written this book and done a good job of it.
The things that I want people to know is that once a child of any age starts to turn away from the parent, whether they're a minor or full-grown adult, but they're making it clear that they no longer want the parent in their lives, it's really easy to step into what I call the quicksand, which is basically once those feelings of rejection or shame or fear or anger get triggered, and nothing can trigger in us as parents more than when our children turn away from us, it can trigger such profound feelings that the ways that we respond aren't necessarily in our best interest. So tonight we're going to go over some of those more common.
Sometimes, an estrangement or the beginning of one can feel like throwing an interception on the very first play of a game against the Texans if you're Jared Goff. And instead of settling down and making a bunch of clean passes like you have been for the last 6 weeks, you throw another interception, and then another, and then another, and then another, and then somehow you've thrown 5 interceptions in one game. The point is, at the very end of that, you still want you and your child to come together the way the Lions somehow managed to beat the Texans yesterday. I just want to get that in there. That didn't matter at all. I just want to talk about Jared Goff throwing 5 interceptions. What a time. That's my MVP pick, by the way.
In ways that parents respond. Some of it we respond to out of fear or anxiety or hurt or anger, but other times we respond just out of kind of the way our parents might have responded from an earlier generation, or ideas about what our children might need from us. So
being a parent does not change the fact that you're a person, and people feel, and people have ideas, and people have feelings. And when you hurt people's feelings, the way they respond may not be the most accurate depiction of who they are. Now, you have to be able to let that go or set it aside when you're a parent. And you have to be able to parent first before having some sort of negative reaction to something your child says or does.
When I use the word mistake, I want you to know that that's something that we all do. I did it when I was going through my estrangement with my adult child. Really, every parent I know goes through one or more, if not all of them. But they're important to label and to understand.
I did not know that about him. Again, I don't know too much about him. So he said he went through an estrangement with his adult child. So this is like another side of things, right? Because we have estranged parents on TikTok and on YouTube just kind of sitting there complaining about their kids. This man wrote a book about how to heal that conflict. And now we're giving him the benefit of allowing us to have the impression that he is no longer estranged. And maybe that's why he wrote the book. This is what I did. This is what you can do. Which is what we've been saying for so long. Hey, this is my experience. This is what I did. This is also what you can do. Rather than, this is what I think you should do, even though it's something I didn't and wouldn't do.
And to work towards resolution, because your potential for a reconciliation often hinges on whether or not you can either repair the mistakes that you made or get a deeper and better understanding of what it is that's caused your child to turn away from you. So the first mistake that I want to talk about is a feeling that your reconciliation with your child should be based on fairness rather than just straightforward practicality. And what I want you to think about when you're working towards reconciliation is not what's fair. There's a bunch of things about estrangement and alienation which isn't fair. In fact,
you have to choose sometimes between feeling heard and understood and wanted and loved as deeply as you want to be and handing those feelings over to someone else. Sometimes relationships are not going to be 50-50, whether that's with your parent, your child, a partner, a friend. And it's usually within the moment. It's usually, hey, this week it's going to be 70-30. Next week it'll be 30-70. That's more for your partner and friends. As a parent, one of the sacrifices you make, rather should make, is not always feeling great to make sure that your kids do. This isn't about teaching your kids right from wrong. This isn't about making sure your kids are their best versions of themselves. This isn't making sure that your kids are learning how to be a good person. This is, I said something I shouldn't have said to my child. They said something they shouldn't have said to me. We're both hurt. But within that relationship, within you raising a child, it's not 50-50. It is not their job to take care of your feelings. It is your job to take care of theirs. And so you have to let go a little bit of being understood and wantingness of every relationship to be 50-50 when it is about your child. It is more your job to take care of them than it is for them to take care of you. And if you do a good enough job, that'll flip later on.
I would say with all of the families that I work with, it's really unfair. If it were fair, the model would be the same that it would be, say, with a best friend or a spouse or somebody else. You talk about your perspective, they talk about their perspective. You feel hurt, or talk about how the ways that you felt hurt or misunderstood. Your child talks about the way that they feel hurt or misunderstood. You put your heads together, you try to understand where the other one's coming from, you make sense of it, and then you try to move on as a result. But that's not the case once alienation is in place. It's just not that kind of a dynamic. A lot of adult children will say they want a relationship with a parent that's one that's equal, but it's probably not one that's going to feel very equal to you. It's probably going to feel very one way and very unequal. So one of the reasons that parents make so-called mistakes with their adult children when they do this is that most of us have never encountered anything like this in our lives. You know, the rules and guidelines that are required to reconcile are unlike anything that you probably have had to undertake or understand in the rest of your life or apply.
When people are learning to apologize deeper than just saying the words, I'm sorry, they have a hard time. And I'm not a part of it. We have a hard time letting go of the part where we want to be understood. Instead of going, I'm sorry that I did this, I won't do it again. A lot of the time when we're growing into that, we say, I'm sorry, but, and then we try to explain ourselves. Later on, and hopefully by the time you're a parent, if you're going to be one, you should learn that your explanation doesn't always help people, and that your job in that situation isn't to try and be understood, it's to try and resolve an issue. And sometimes that means just saying, I'm sorry, even if you don't believe it, even if you think they just misunderstood you. Sometimes that's foreign to people. That's a concept people aren't ready to understand or to go through. There's a lot of letting go that you have to just be willing to do in relationships to maintain those relationships. It's little things. It's that you don't have to be understood in every perspective that you have, and you shouldn't be willing to defend perspectives that hurt other people
in the rest of your life. So getting back to the notion of fairness, if it were fair, you'd get to make demands about how much time you could spend with your children or grandchildren. You could ask for more. If it were fair, you could demand more empathy and forgiveness for whatever mistakes you did make with your child growing up or have during this period of time of alienation or estrangement. You could demand more commitment. We actually don't get to do that during this period where you're working on healing the distance between you and your adult child. If it were fair, you would get credit for all the money you spent on your child and for all the time you spent, or being the more dedicated parent than maybe the other parent was in the case of a divorce. It's not infrequent that the much more dedicated parent is being kicked to the curb, and the other parent who wasn't that involved in the parenting, who's often the one who's doing the alienating, is now getting the credit for how the child turned out. They're the ones going on family vacations. They're the ones spending time with the grandchildren. If it were fair, that wouldn't happen.
We have not talked about that a lot. In situations where like one parent is very much more of the parent than the other one, and then that's the parent that gets left behind. There's a couple of reasons that happens. Sometimes you're just going to have an issue with a parent, and it's going to be with the one who's actually there and not the one that's probably the fun parent. The one that you spend weekends with, who just like takes you out to eat, spends time with you doing fun things. There's something about just spending time with people in general. Like sometimes you can spend too much time with someone, and then that just gets annoying to be around them, to have them around you. And that can happen when you're with one parent much more than the other. If you have two people who are equally as bad for you and you're spending a lot of time with one of them, you can have a bigger issue with one of them. You probably have a much more in-depth relationship with one parent if you're spending more time with them and you get to know who they are, and the other parent, you kind of just know who they are around you, in the same way that you know your family better than you know your friends when you're growing up.
If it were fair, you'd get credit for being as good of a parent as your own, or even...
Also, that has to suck. It has to absolutely suck to be the parent who does the parenting, who feeds you, who clothes you, takes you to school, does all the things they don't want to do, makes all of your doctor's appointment. And then the fun parent is the one that they like better, the one they spend weekends with, or every other weekend, or they see once a month, and they just go to Six Flags or something. That would hurt me real bad.
A better parent than yours, or giving your child opportunities and experiences as a child or young adult that nobody ever gave you. If it were fair, your child would think about that and give you credit for that, and would say that, wow, I know that nobody ever gave you the kind of opportunities that you've given me, or spent money on me, or schools or therapy or learning specialists or tutors or whatever. If it were fair, you get credit for that. Your child would think, well, yeah, I'm angry or hurt by my parent for X, Y, or Z, but they really invested heavily in my happiness and well-being, so they should get credit for that. But you're not going to get credit for it. If it were fair, your child would understand that when you said you did the best that you could, you really mean you did the best that you could, and that no parent is able to do any better than what they know at the time that they're raising their children, what the parenting pedagogies were at the time they were raising their children,
the idea of your parent doing the best they absolutely could and meaning it, and not having been a good parent, kind of hurts. There are plenty of things I can point to that both my parents did, or where I understand that it's not their fault. And I've talked about it a few times. My mother's financial situation, not her fault. Like, I'm never going to blame her for not having money when we were kids. I'm never going to blame her for also having been physically abused by my dad. I'm never going to blame her for like a lot of those things. And I do think that she did a good job, or at least tried really, really hard in some of those, even if it didn't work out that well. There's plenty of things I'm never going to blame her for. I do think that there are more than not enough reasons to think that she could have done a better job in other places. I don't know. I don't know how to feel about the idea that regardless of the job that she did, she may have actually tried her best.
Who they were married to, and how that person might have made parenting much more challenging, what their financial challenges were at the time, what their own childhood traumas were that may have made it harder for them to know how to be a good parent. And finally, the way that the child themselves may have made parenting much more difficult.
There are a few things there that I do want to touch. I never had a step parent, so that's not an experience that I have. Like, I don't know. There are plenty of times where we've heard stories where like the step parent was like great. And there are plenty of times where we heard stories where the step parent was like actively really bad. That goes into a couple of different conversations. Sometimes the parent will like be so afraid of losing the step parent that they just let it happen, or they enable it. And sometimes the parent will see the step parent being a problem and get them out of there. Their own childhood traumas. That's hard because it's not really my job or anyone's job to tell you how to handle trauma. But that comes all the way back to there has to be things that you are willing to let go. You very actively have to do a good job of letting go when raising a child. I understand that my dad's parents probably beat him before he ran away. And that led to him thinking it was okay to do the same thing to me and my sister and my mom. But I would never use that as an excuse to do the same thing to anyone. There are things that, as an adult, you have to find a way to let go. And I don't know what those ways are. Like, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm any smarter than the average person. But I don't think it's a hot take to say you cannot abuse people in the way that you were abused. And you cannot use trauma. You really can't. In any way that it is, whether it's mental or physical, you cannot use trauma to justify hurting other people. You just can't. In the same way that Don is like, oh, well, it doesn't matter what I said. I had a concussion. I've had multiple concussions. And I hope to God I never used any of them as an excuse to just be a terrible person. You should go into parenting expecting it to be as hard as it's possibly going to be. Whatever challenges that comes with, whether you're alone or not, whatever that means, there's never going to be an easy way to parent. At what point is it too hard? I guess is what we're getting at. Your child can come out with disabilities. Your child could come out with deformities. Your child could come out just being difficult and disruptive in class. Like, there's just like so many different ways that your child can make something that's already hard harder. But I don't see a reason to blame the child. I don't see a way to blame the child. It sucks to have to work harder to be a parent than you probably already have to. But I think that's all that is. It comes all the way back to you signing up to be a parent and them not signing up to be a child. I was not an easy child. And I mean like child, like before I was pretty cognitive. I was born with a cleft palate. So I had to have like 2 surgeries the first year of my life. And for someone whose parents didn't speak English, that was probably terrifying. Granted, they were in Southern California and someone there is going to speak Spanish, but scary nonetheless. I did not do a good job of sitting still in school. I know now that I was bored, and I don't know why nobody figured that out. Don't know why nobody figured out that I was just bored in school and needed to be way more challenged. That's it. I don't know. Again, this comes all the way back to I don't think parenting is ever going to be easy. Sorry if you have to work harder than the average parent, but I do think that's your job. I think you should be allowed to complain about it a little bit, but not to the point where your child feels like they have to dip out.
Our children can have their own challenges when they're young and when they're grown that make parenting much more challenging. They can have learning disabilities, anxiety, depression, ADD, autism spectrum, a whole host of issues, what we call child-to-parent effects, which make parenting much more difficult. In addition, once they're grown, they can marry people, what I call the cult of one, somebody who says to your adult child, choose them or me, you can't have both. And
I don't have anything I want to say about that. I want to talk about the opposite because I don't think we've talked about it at all. It is your job to protect your partner from your parents. It is not the job of anyone, to tell you what relationship you should have with your parents. If your parents have different ideas than you, even if they're harmful, I understand the argument that they're still your parents. I'm an adult. I get it. I understand that it's not the easiest thing to do to cut your parents off or to move on from any of your family. I'm very lucky in that I just don't have parents, and so I don't have to deal with that. That being said, it is your job to protect your friends and your partners from your parents. If your parents are racist, right? Let's say your parents just really, really, really hate Mexicans. Your parents are so anti-Mexican for whatever reason. Your parents your dad lost a job in 2008 during the recession and for some reason just blames it on Mexicans. Gosh darn it, they took our jobs and just never let it go. It is not your job as their child to cut them off, to teach them. They're probably too old to learn anything. If you and I are in a relationship and then you go, oh, I want to introduce you to my parents. I meet your parents and then your parents are like, oh, he's Mexican. It is your job to get in the middle of that. I don't need you to fight with your parents. I don't need you to cut them off. But if you know that bringing your partner or your friends around your family is going to be a problem, it is your job to be a barrier between them at the very least. And then the question now becomes, how am I in that situation supposed to handle your parents? It doesn't always have to be a problematic issue. Like we saw the Dr. Phil episode where the woman just did not like the son-in-law. Like she really, really just did not. And she was insufferable. Like even her husband was like, I don't really listen to her talk, which is like another gross thing. I don't know why you're marrying people you don't like. I don't know why you're staying married to people you don't like. That's all that is. You should protect your partner and your friends from your family if your family is going to be a problem in some way.
Can't have both. And so that is, ends up pulling the child away from the parent. If it were fair, you'd be able to speak to those issues and talk about, in fact, how unfair that is. So what I want you to do is give it up. It's not fair. You have to accept that it's not fair and it's never going to be fair. That ship has sailed. The era where parents could expect a lot more from their children has now gone. We are now in the era of children feeling like they don't owe the parent anything. And so if there's going to be a relationship with the parent and the adult child, it's going to be because the adult child wants one, not because they feel obligated to have one or feel like the parent is deserving of that, as unfair as that is. So one of the reasons that
it is dumb to expect your kids to take care of you if you don't take care of them. And you can do all the little things, right? You can change their diapers, you can feed them, you can clothe them, but that doesn't make you a good parent. That's just being a parent. If you are a good enough parent, your kids will want to pay you back and they'll want to take care of you. I am so jealous of the people who are like best friends with their parents. Like that must feel so nice. Or the people who like, when anything comes up, they immediately call their mom. They're like, oh my God, guess what? Those are the people who are going to keep their relationship with their parents until the day one of them dies. Is it codependent? I don't know, dude. Again, I don't have that relationship. No idea. Hopefully not.
That you want to have this orientation is if you're too preoccupied with the fairness, you're just going to be mad all the time. You're just going to feel like they're being mean to you and you feel very victimized by them. And that's not the right condition to try to work towards a reconciliation. It's going to affect how you communicate. It's going to make you more demanding and more resentful than you should be. It's going to make you feel like you should talk about all the ways that you feel hurt or rejected or victimized by your child. If it were fair, you'd be able to talk about it. But guess what? It's not fair. So you can't talk about it. In fact,
I do not think your child owes you anything. And I do really, really believe in what I just said, that if you are a good enough parent, your child will find a way to pay you back. Could that be taking care of you when you're old? Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it's unfair to not be able to have that conversation. I think it's unfair the way older generations will victimize themselves within these conversations. There's a big, big difference between why are you doing this and then accepting an answer and why are you doing this to me? And making yourself the victim when it's probably not about you. Like everyone has their own life to live. And sometimes, and it sucks, but sometimes people are too busy to keep you in theirs. You should raise your children well enough for them to want to come home to you. It turns into the idea of you want there to be a transition between you being their parent and then when they're an adult, you being their friend. And if you were not the parent they needed, they probably don't want to be your friend. I'm at the age, I'm 27, where I have friends on either side. I have plenty of people who are so in love with who their parents raised them to be and who spend as much time with their parents as they can. I have people whose parents did not do a great job and now they just avoid them. They see them on holidays. I have a few friends who like, and this is like a weird area that I'm never going to understand. I have a few friends who are just like, who feel like they're indebted to their parents, don't get along with them, don't really like hanging out with them, but their parents have them come over like once a week and they do so. Then they always all just feel really bad, or like, oh, their parents just like say something stupid every week and it hurts their feelings, and then someone's crying, and that just like seems like a lot. That just doesn't seem fun for anyone. I'm not a big fan of forcing relationships. There are plenty of people who are going to take care of you when you're old just because they feel bad. If that's the parent you want to be, if you want to make your kids feel guilty, so guilty that they take care of you, You don't think that's kind of gross?
I'll talk shortly about mistake number 2, about why talking about the ways that you feel hurt or rejected or scared or angry also is a mistake, and why that's also unfair. So really, the model that you really should have is one that you would have more when your children were young. And by that, I mean like the age of 2 or 3. And I don't mean that in any disrespectful way to the adult child. I mean that you shouldn't think that it's going to be one of equals.
He's probably going to explain it, but I'll do so before he does. What he means is that you should hold the position in the relationship of being the parent. Whether the child is 2 or 20, you should expect the relationship to be unfair to you, because of the sacrifices of being a parent.
Where you get to make demands and talk about your feelings of what your needs and requirements are. You know, when I'm doing family therapy, reconciliation therapy with a parent and an estranged or alienated adult child, I'll often warn the parent before therapy that this isn't like marriage therapy. It isn't like you're going to have an equal say over the terms of the relationship going forward, or you'll have an equal say over how you've been affected. No, it's much more like divorce, you know, like where there's been a divorce and the person who left is considering, well, maybe I'll come back into the marriage, but first I need to hear that you're willing to accept my rules of engagement. That's more what it's like. So even though a lot of these children say they want a marriage of that's equal, they don't really want a marriage, not a marriage that's equal, a relationship with a parent.
We're not going to touch that too much. I do think it's a little weird how, I understand because it's relationship to relationship, but every single one of the parents is in some way compared it to like romantic relationships.
Of one that's equal. That's not actually really what they want. They want a relationship where you're attentive and empathic to their needs, and you're in a position of repair, and your needs basically, at least in early reconciliation, aren't going to be very much on the table. If you're working towards reconciliation, it means that you're going to have to be much more accepting of the reality that it's a one-way street.
If you're working on reconciling with your child who became estranged from you due to your actions, the idea of having a relationship with them that's 50-50 is unfortunately the idea of going back to the relationship that you had previously that caused estrangement, because that's probably what you thought you had. You probably thought you had a relationship where you were going to be heard and understood. They were going to be heard and understood. And if not, if the problem was that the relationship was 80% you being a bad parent and 20% them being a child who couldn't take it, you offering 50-50 is a little gross. You being like, no, wait, come back. I promise I'll listen to you this time. I know that I'm wrong, but I'm a very firm believer in chasms being irreparable. I'm a very firm believer in people breaking up and not getting back together. I know that I'm wrong. I know that there are examples where people have broken up, gone back together in a year, and then spent their lives together. I know that there are people who have reconnected with their parents and it's going great. However, I think more often than not, if there is a problem worth splitting a relationship up, or that problem cannot be resolved by then creating a relationship that is 50-50. Because then that problem that caused whatever chasm there was is never going to be addressed. If you are with someone, romantically or not, who just does not listen to you, will not listen to anything you have to say, doesn't believe anything you say, and then you break up and their whole thing then becomes, wait, come back, I will listen, I'll start listening. I don't know that I could trust them to now listen 100% of the time. And that doesn't mean always do what you want. That's more so just acknowledging your thoughts and opinions. And then that turns into the whole like, well, if you're willing to come back, they expect that you're also willing to take it again. And then that comes back to, this wasn't the first time, that for the most part, estrangement is not a first resort. There's a lot of finding different ways to make circles here and to end up in the very same parking spot. And it probably gets tiring just to hear this over and over again. You should do what's best for you. And sometimes that's not holding on to relationships, regardless of who they're with or how long they've kid.
It's also going to require more patience from you because nothing is more infuriating, humiliating, and devastating than the rejection of an adult child. It also requires patience because it's going to take time. Sadly, it may take years. But another thing that can be helpful to you is to really work not only for your love for your child, because I think that will allow you to not be so mad at them and to assume that they have their reasons for cutting off contact with you, even if you hate those reasons and even if you think those were completely coached by the alienating parent or somebody else or their therapist or their person that they're married to. It's still useful to think about, well, why are they doing this? They must have their reasons for doing this. And again, you don't have to agree with it. You don't have to think that they're right, but you do have to understand it. Finally, and I'm still on mistake number one, so you can see why this lecture is going to last for 75 minutes. You have to have an unconditional love for yourself. And this perhaps is the most important of all the advice that I give to parents who are going through this, because it's very hard for parents, moms in particular, to hold on to their value of themselves as a parent when their child turns against them, because nothing makes us feel more unloved, maybe even more unlovable than when our child rejects us and basically acts like all of our years of love and dedication don't mean anything. Nothing makes us feel more like we were terrible parents, let alone people, than when a child does that, even though rationally we might know for a fact that that's not the case. So you have to own your own narrative of who you are as a parent and a person.
I understand that. I understand holding on to love for yourself. I hope people don't confuse that with holding on to the notion that they're anything but wrong. I hope people are like, I can assert that I'm a person with values, regardless of what those are, while not going into this just expecting me to be right and to be told that I'm right.
And you can't cede that to your child. That is your birthright. I don't care how precious, lovely, whatever, smart, talented your kid is. They don't get to say what kind of a parent or person you were. Do not cede that power and that authority to them. So I have a few techniques that I think are helpful to parents in this regard.
I don't agree with what he just said. It's hard for me to recognize that the child that you raised for however long you did, 12, 14, 18, 20 years, doesn't know you better than almost anyone else. Because a lot of these parents that we've seen have been pretty abusive, whether it was physically or mentally, whether or not they meant to be, right? And so let's say you really didn't mean to be. Let's say you really did not mean to be. You were told you were being so. You didn't believe it. You did not mean to be, even though you were mentally abusive. So you did that to your kid for 18 years. You really did not mean to be. You were told a couple of times that you were doing it. You didn't believe it because they're the kid. They don't know what they're talking about. I do think the kid has a right to be like, you were a bad parent. I don't think that you should hold on so tightly to the idea that your kid doesn't get to criticize you. I'm going to say that your child probably has a better idea of your parenting style, the things that you did as a parent, than anyone else. And there are things that are inexcusable, right? And I'll take, again, I'm just going to talk about my own experience. There's not a single thing my dad could say that would make me understand why he would just casually throw me. There is not a single reason my dad could be like, well, no, I thought you were going to land on your feet. Haha, isn't it funny? I thought you were a cat. Turns out you weren't. There's no way to excuse that. So it doesn't matter if he thought it was okay, if he didn't see it as abuse, if he whatever, right? There's no way to excuse that. So even if out of nowhere, he was like, I was a good dad, I get to say that he wasn't. I don't think your values matter as much as your actions. I don't think it matters who you say you are as much as it matters who you are. I hope that the values you have don't ever have to be tested. You don't know who you are until you're in a situation. And I just hope that you never have to be in that situation.
One is from my first book on estrangement called When Parents Hurt, Compassionate Strategies When You and Your Grown Child Don't Get Along. And it's called My Value as a Parent. And in this exercise, you basically just write out 10 things of what made you or makes you a good parent. So it could be things like,
I fed it, I clothed it, I left it outside. You know those like dog leashes where you like pound a stake in the ground and then the dog like runs in circles. So like the leash gets smaller and the dog's like, how'd that get smaller? I did that with the kid.
I gave my child opportunities nobody ever gave me. I stayed in a difficult marriage because I didn't want to put my kid through a divorce. Or I left an abusive marriage because I didn't want to expose my child to the other parent's abuse. Or
this is one of the ones that sucks because it's completely dependent on whether the child ends up understanding or not. And I'm talking about specifically, I stayed in a bad marriage because I didn't want to put my kid through a divorce. There's two ways that goes. Either you're right, you're telling the truth, you did not want to put your kid through that, and that sucks for both of you. Or you're using it as an excuse to not go through a divorce. Oh, but think about how it's going to affect my child. While your child is like subject to you and your partner fighting every single day, and now they think that's what a relationship is. And now your child is going to put up with people who don't treat them well because they learn to just stick with it.
Read a lot of parenting books, or I got my child into therapy, or I went into my own therapy, or I got my child tutors, or I paid for expensive education, or I paid for any education at all. Whatever it is, write it down, keep it on a 3x5 card. And whenever you get confused about your value as a parent, pull it out and look at it. Now,
you have to be so careful. If that makes you feel better, sure. You can never use that against a kid. You have to be so careful there because that's something that people do, right? Is I did this for you. If this is really just to make you feel better and it's going to make you feel better, all right, write it down, put it on a card, keep it to yourself. But the second you're like, actually, I stayed in a bad marriage for you, then it gets gross.
Doesn't mean you didn't make mistakes. I made mistakes. You made mistakes. You know, your kids' parents they're going to make mistakes with their kids. So this idea that, you know, if you make mistakes with your kid, you don't deserve a relationship with them is of course ridiculous, but it's very popular in our culture. So don't believe the hype, but you have to hold on to that value yourself if your child isn't going to give it to you. And while you're going through an estrangement or an alienation, they're not going to give it to you. So stop going to that dry well rather, to get water. You have to get that from your friends or your religious institution or other people who know you and care about you in order to get a much healthier feedback about who you are and who you were. So part and parcel of all of that is being in self-dialogue with who you are as a person and as a parent. So yes, I make a big deal out of making amends to adult children because I think it's one of the best ways to get on the same page with them, show them that you're willing to accept their terms, their rules of engagement, take responsibility.
This feels a little like we're leaning towards lying to your kids, right? Like, it almost sounds like he's saying, and I don't know that he is or he isn't, but it sounds a little like he's saying, be ready to apologize for your kids while still holding on to who you are and not changing at all. Don't let them devalue what you did as a parent. Stay firm in that you did a good job, but be willing to give up the notion that you didn't do anything wrong. Be willing to just say sorry. Even if you don't mean it, just have a relationship with your kid. And that feels like you're lying to the adult child. Like, I don't want you to just tell me that you've changed, I guess. Yeah, I would like you to be a different person. I don't know that lying to me is that helpful. If it's a small issue and you really don't mean that you're sorry, but you want to say sorry and that'll fix it, sure. But I don't know that I want a whole relationship with someone who's just lying to me.
It's also good for your self-esteem as well and your own self-repair to acknowledge your mistakes and face them and not try to hide them from yourself or your child. But you also, it's useful to remind yourself that whatever mistakes you made, you had good reasons for those mistakes. And you didn't do them because you were mean or bad or selfish. You did them for some of the reasons that I mentioned before. And if I didn't mention the ones that were true for you, then you should write those down as well. So
the purpose of calling them mistakes is to acknowledge that they were the wrong thing to do and that they may have not been on purpose. Regardless of whether or not something is on purpose, doesn't change whether or not it should be apologized for and whether or not there should be amends for it. Sorry, I forgot to pick you up at soccer practice, and so you were there literally all night and now you're freezing. You don't really have to make up for that, but don't you kind of feel like you want to?
Another useful thing is the ability to compartmentalize your feelings about your child so it doesn't ruin your life. Estrangement and alienation have the power to ruin a parent's life. Your kid does not deserve to ruin your life. Again, I don't care how adorable they are or were or how much you love them or whatever. They don't get to ruin your life. Do not let them do that. So there's a bunch of different ways to do that. One is to write out that exercise. The other is to get feedback from people who know you and love you. The third is the ability to compartmentalize them so you're not thinking about them.
Again, want to say that I see what he's trying to say. Unfortunately, I think it enables the wrong people. Yeah, I'm still trying to hold on to like him just trying to get out information and telling a whole group that they get to decide whether something is right or wrong. He spent the entire first part of this explaining that you're going to have to let go a lot of being right and a lot of like wanting a 50-50 relationship because your kid is going to be like, no, these are the things you did wrong, and you just have to nod your head at it. And now he's transitioned into understand that they have things to say, but understand that they're not true. You were a good parent. You did a good job, regardless of what they think you did. But be willing to say that they're right for the sake of your relationship. That just feels, you're not healing anything. You're masking it at that point.
So easy for parents, moms in particular, to ruminate, which means to turn something over and over and over again in your mind. And a useful way to think about that is the notion that anxiety is living in the future, depression is living in the past, and resilience comes from living in the presence, resilience and joy. Now, the reason that I think that's such an important frame is that if you can catch yourself how you're thinking about your estrangement or how you're thinking about yourself, you're probably thinking either in the past or the future. If you're thinking in the past, you're regretting, you're shaming yourself, you're feeling sorrowful, guilty. If you're thinking in the future, you're catastrophizing, you're future tripping, you're worried about whether you're ever going to talk to your grandchildren or children again or see them. And you have no control over that in terms of the future. So far better to work on, whether it's meditation or prayer, some kind of present-centered activity where you turn toward your feeling rather than away from the feeling.
Yes, you should focus on your own like healing meditation. You want to feel good and you don't want to like spend your day just feeling bad. However, there is no real way to get into any sort of counseling with your child that is going to be effective without digging into the past. Like imagine you have this relationship with your parents, you go to therapy together and your therapist goes, we're not going to talk about what's happened in the past. That doesn't matter. We're just going to talk about what you guys can do to have a good relationship starting from now on. How does that make sense? How would that work? Like if my dad was like, hey, let's forget about all the times I used to beat you. I'd be like, no. What? You're the reason I flinch every time my girlfriend sneezes.
You allow the feeling to come into your awareness rather than to feel like, no, I can't face that feeling. It's too painful. It's too awful. Again, that's why amends letters work. You kind of go like, all right, let's get it all out on paper. Yes, I could see why you felt neglected, hurt, whatever, by me. Here it is. It's all written out. If
I hate the way he says it. Like he's so forgiving in the way that he talks to the parents about like holding on to their values. But then he's like, oh, but when you say, all right, sure, whatever, it was my fault. You just write it out, send it out. Not a big deal. Oh, yeah, I can see why you felt neglected. He's very much an estranged parent. And I wanted to give him I wanted to hope that he found how to be a good person and how to be a good parent. And like, that's what caused the coming back together of him and whoever he was estranged from. But it sounds like he figured out that the easiest way to do this was to pretend that you're sorry. There are plenty of times where I agree that whether or not you feel sorry, you should just say it. Plenty of times. If I raised a child and I neglected them and abused them and gave them some sort of complex and it was like, oh, I'm just going to say sorry so that you stop talking, that's gross. And then they like break away from you and you go, oh, I said I was sorry.
If you write it out, then you're in a position to be able to kind of go, well, there it is, and face it. It's what we talk about as exposure therapy, in cognitive behavior therapy. The idea that if you continue to expose yourself to that of which you're the most afraid of, the thought or the feeling or the belief starts to lose its hold. It's kind of like if you go see a scary movie, right? First time you see it, you're scared if it's doing its job, right? Oh my God, this is where the guy comes in with an axe, starts cutting up people. That's horrifying. Watch that movie 10 times. By 10th time, you're going to be like yawning, pouring yourself, another drink or looking at your email or doing something like that, because your brain has already figured out that the thing that you're the most afraid of isn't going to happen. Well, so the same is true with our beliefs about ourselves and the future and the past. The more that we can just kind of expose ourselves to those feelings and accept them, radical acceptance, as we call it, the better off you're going to be. The more that you try to fight it, white knuckle it, go, no, I was a great parent, I don't deserve this, blah, 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 you're just going to feel worse and worse and worse. So it's critically important, if you get nothing else from today's lecture, the things that I've talked about in terms of the mistakes, self-care, self-compassion, owning your own narrative about who you are as a parent, as a person, not giving that to your kid, that will get you pretty far down the road in terms of feeling better.
He spoke on not just holding on to the notion that you were a great parent, because that's not going to get you anywhere. We've looked at so many of these examples, and not once, and I'm not saying it doesn't happen, I'm saying we haven't seen it yet. Not once have we seen an example of someone who was a good parent saying they were a good parent. We've seen a lot of people be like, I was a good parent, I fed them. And a lot of people being like, well, no, like maybe, I was a good parent, minus the fact that I only talked to them once a month for the first 18 years of their life. I'm pretty desperate for it now. I want to see it. I want to see the person that was a really, really good parent. I want to see the person that did a great job and whose kids just said no. And I'm so scared that the only way to see that is to go on intervention. Within these relationships, I've yet to see a single time where I'm like, oh no, the parent did a good job. Like, I've yet to see a single one where it makes sense. We've seen the example of one parent leading into the reconciliation of the other a couple of times. There was that one 20-year-old on the Estranged Parents channel who was like, yeah, I had a really bad relationship with my mom. She took out credit cards under my name. She stole a bunch of cash that I had been saving up. She forced me to get a joint bank account with her so that she could take the money. And it forced me to have a relationship with my dad, who I hadn't talked to in 10 years. And now he and I are super close. We've seen that. But we have just not seen someone who's like, I'm a good parent, actually be a good parent. We've seen people who weren't intentionally harming their child. We saw a woman on Dr. Phil who wasn't necessarily abusive or in the way of her daughter, but she was a hypochondriac. She was constantly posting on Facebook about how sick she was. She pretended to have cancer and then constantly wore cancer survivor merch. And her daughter was just like, I don't know that I want you around my children, which is very fair. But I've yet to see a situation in which somebody did a really good job raising their kid and their kid was like, oh, I just can't do this. Also, in giving up apologies in order to make the other person feel better, a lot of the time that's done by the child, or in romantic relationships by the person who isn't the aggressor, just to get conflict to stop. So it's weird to think of it happening from the other end, because usually the person with power is so convinced that they're right that they need to be right and they need to win. If somebody tells you they're really good at arguing, or that they're always right, it like immediately just, it's such a big red flag for me. Mostly because people who are really good at being right are just really good at not realizing that they're wrong. And they'll just keep beating a point until the other person gives up.
Okay. But there's more mistakes to go. Aren't you lucky? Mistake number 2 is huge, and it's not subtle. And that is trying to motivate your child through guilt or not being mindful about the ways that you communicate with your child that might make them feel guilty. So the reality is today that guilt is really your biggest enemy. It used to be in our society, and it still is true in many other societies, that guilt was considered a reasonable thing to induce in one's children. It was part of giving them...
Which is wild. The idea of making people feel guilty on purpose is weird. Like for real reasons, right? I'm not like murderers should feel guilty. People who hurt other people should feel guilty. People who voted for Trump should feel guilty. But like the notion of making your kid feel guilty in order to guilt them into taking care of you or just doing things for you is weird.
Or moral framework. This is right. This is wrong. There was a certain degree of clarity about that, and parents weren't so freaking worried about, the coercive effects of their authority. So they felt free to, make their children feel guilty when they behaved badly. And similarly, when they became adults, they felt like they had the power and reasonableness to say, no, that's crappy behavior. Why you?
Okay, he's explaining manipulation. He's like, we felt like we could manipulate them before. Can't do that now.
Doing that. Don't act like that. That makes you a bad person. That's bad behavior. That ship has sailed. So you can no longer do that. Why? Because you're going to get labeled toxic, narcissistic, borderline, boundary crossing, gaslighting, whatever.
Be careful of being manipulative. You might be labeled a manipulator.
So you're not supposed to make your child feel guilty, because we now live in a culture where the only thing that keeps a child in contact with a parent is whether or not that relationship makes them feel good.
So Bach said the phrasing is funny, and that's something we've been talking about a little bit. Something about doing all these videos live is that sometimes I say things kind of in a dumb way. Or when I'm editing, I'll go, oh, I should have said this instead. Or I'll have really smart thoughts later on when it's not 7 a.m. And so sometimes I will excuse people not being the most eloquent speakers when they're live because it's hard. It is hard. It is hard. It is hard. It is hard. This goes out the window with people like Diane who have everything scripted out. And if you've noticed, he does too. So this wording has been written down, read, and not changed. If you look at his eyes, he's just reading everything. And I'll go back 10 seconds so we can just stare at him.
In a culture where the only thing that keeps a child in contact with a parent is whether or not that relationship makes them feel good. If it makes them feel good, then they're much more likely to stay in contact with the parent.
So there's a little bit less of an excuse when you've written this out and the phrasing is weird. Probably should have done a better job editing.
If the relationship makes them feel bad, then they're much more likely to label the parent and the relationship as problematic. And then you're going to hear that they need to cut off contact with you to work on themselves, and you should be working on themselves, and they need to protect themselves and their children from you because they're working on prioritizing their mental health. So there's a very strong feeling in our culture that if the relationship in any way makes you feel bad or bad about yourself, then not only can you cut off that person, but you should cut off that person, because cutting off that person is a form of separation and individuation and autonomy. These are kind of the watchwords of our culture that really prizes these qualities in ways that's really driving families apart. So guilt is your enemy. It is not your friend. Now, there are still cultures where guilt is a reasonable thing to do. In Japanese child rearing, for example, their Japanese parents very early on inculcate their children, but not in an abusive way, but they just sensitize their children to others' feelings. And surveys of Japanese children versus American children show that Japanese children from a very young age are much more empathic towards other children and have a much better understanding of what other children are feeling than Americans. So what we have wanted.
I will absolutely agree with the notion that Americans are much more selfish than the rest of the world. However, that is on the parent to teach the child. And so if the parent does a bad job of that, then surprise?
Part of this is our fault as parents, that the way the parenting has changed is that, we're prior generations of parents. If you look at parenting surveys, say in the 1920s, what we wanted from our children was for them to be kind of conforming, church.
In the 1920s, what we wanted from our children was more than half of them to survive. We tried everything, including towel.
Going members of society. Over time, that's conforming, church-going members of society. Over time, that's changed. And since the 1960s, what we've wanted is for them to be individuals and autonomous and self-possessed and possessing of social capital and being assertive, knowing what they want, being creative. And at the same time that in the early 1900s and before, there was the notion that stress and difficulties in childhood and in life would make children stronger, it'd build character, strong backbone, put hair on their chest. That all gave way to much more of what some call a form of hothouse parenting, a belief that children are vulnerable and can easily be damaged, and that if parents aren't enormously careful and psychological and intensive in their parenting, then somehow those children aren't going to thrive and they're not going to make it into a healthy, psychologically well-adjusted adulthood. Now, there's plenty of examples in other cultures where parents don't parent that way and their children seem to do just fine. So this model that we've been using for the past half century or so isn't necessarily founded on anything particularly scientific.
I think there's too many things happening there. And when we look at the way that we raise children, we should do it within our own culture, because that's the environment you're going to be in, right? It doesn't help you to be in an entirely different society with an entirely different set of values, the way they raise kids is different. Yeah, that makes sense. That's not the society you're in, and that's not the society you're going to be in. So you should do a good job of raising your kids within the culture that you're in. The problem with looking back at previous generations is that people do not learn enough from what they did wrong. In raising your child to be strong, it is entirely different to work with them to become a strong person than it is to bully them into thinking they need to be strong, or giving them a false idea of what being strong is. You're going to hurt them more than not doing that. I know a lot of people who in high school started working out because they were being bullied. And you can make the argument that helped them, but it has a much lower success rate than the people who started working out because their friends started working out and they wanted to be a part of it, or because their dad worked out with them. If you are able to guide your children into the right ideas, it is way more helpful than trying to bully them into it.
But it's a very powerful form of parenting ideology and pedagogy that isn't going anywhere and is still very popular. And that's why so many adult children say, well, you didn't do this and you didn't do that and you should have done this or that. So I don't owe you a relationship. So I'm cutting off contact with you. So, what does this have to do with guilt? Well, guilt's just going to shut your child down. It's just going to turn your child away from you. And it's just going to cause them to tell you, label you as a narcissist or a borderline, because that's a good way to not feel guilty. If my parents are narcissist or borderline, I don't have any reason to feel guilty for how I'm responding to them or my lack of availability, because really it's their fault that they have the feelings that they do. It's their narcissism.
No, I'm not a narcissist. You're a narcissist, is what he just said.
Or their gaslighting behavior, etc. So a lot of the times when the adult child says that, they're saying that in the spirit of lessening their feelings of guilt.
I was so hoping that we finally had like an adult in this situation who, and I get so many people in my comment section that are like, hey, I was estranged from my kid. I listened, I took the time to learn, and now we're good. Fantastic. I wish we had one of those on YouTube. I thought we did. I thought we found a guy who was like, listen, I wrote the book on this. Literally, I wrote the book on this. Here's how to heal your relationship with your child. And I thought he was going to be like, I realized I was wrong. No, he's going to go lie to them. You're not a narcissist. They're a narcissist. Understand that they're probably just gaslighting you, but then lie to them so that they come back to you. You're telling me Diane read this and it was still too hard for her? She was like, okay, gaslight. Yeah, narcissism. Pretend it was your fault. It wasn't my fault. I can't read this.
Okay, well, what are some other ways that you can make your child feel guilty in a problematic way? Well, one is just by telling them how unhappy you are with the estrangement. Now, it seems like, again, getting back to mistake number one, in a fair world, you'd be able to say that, at least you'd be able to say, you're kind of breaking my heart over here, not having any contact with.
In a fair world, you'd be able to say, you're breaking my heart by going no contact with me, not acknowledging why they may have done so, not taking accountability for the reasons they are estranged, just saying in a fair world, you would be able to tell your side while still not having to care about theirs.
With you or my grandchildren, but you don't get to say that because you're not supposed to make your child feel guilty. So if you talk about how heartbroken or upset or sad or, God forbid, angry about what your child is doing, then it's just going to backfire on you and cause them to pull away. Another thing that parents have tragically learned through the pandemic, or if they got a cancer diagnosis, or they lost a spouse, or their spouse has a cancer diagnosis, or some other fateful disease, is that telling the child that may still not bring them around. And in fact, may cause the child to say, oh, you're just making me feel guilty. You're just trying to make me come around and manipulate me through guilt. So if a child is working on feeling separate from you and for whatever reason has that belief, then making them feel guilty, getting mad at them, understandably, frankly, for not checking in with you, for not caring, or for a revered.
Again, like you're making the kid seem like they're a bad person for not checking in with you, for not caring. There's not been a single child on these videos or in my comment section who didn't feel some level of guilt. Even if they had a great reason for being estranged, even if they didn't go a day without being physically abused, they feel immense guilt over being estranged from their family, from their parents. And you get to be like, oh, they don't care? No, they do. They care too much. They care much more than they should. I say that we all do. We care way too much. It's stupid.
Grandparent is also dying or has died, not coming to the funeral or not giving the parent any kind of condolence. If the parent pushes back and complains about that, then it's just going to make things worse. Now, sometimes parents will say, well, you're just enabling, these kids. And, we have a right to push back against these kids when they behave in this way. And you're just going to, strengthen their voice that their entitledness. And the truth is that you're not going to be able to persuade your child by doing something different. As somebody who writes and speaks in this area, I think I have a much better chance of changing the narrative out there than you do with your own child, because your child has drunk the Kool-Aid of Western individualism. I mean, they've drunk the Kool-Aid of feeling like it's all about them and their feelings. And I know I'm being harsh here, but,
These people say Western individualism like people are so desperate to be alone. People are incredibly desperate as a whole to find individualism within community. You don't want to be alone. You want to feel special within the space that you're in. You want to feel like your thoughts, your individual values are valued. You want to feel like what you have to say matters within your community. You don't want to go home and be alone. That's just being lonely. And that's why so many of these kids stay longer than they should. That's why people stay in relationships longer than they should. Nobody wants to be alone. Individualism isn't about being on your own with all the time about everything. It's about feeling like the things that you have to say are important within the space that you're in. Does it go way too far for some people? Yes, but that's an entirely different conversation that has nothing to do with this. People want to be more than just labels, and especially the labeled of my child. People want to be more than just random people's kids.
If you work with enough sobbing parents every day, you start to feel a little more harshly towards the kids that are doing this to them. That from the parent.
Okay, but again, that's not being done to them. They're victimizing themselves in a situation in which they are not a victim. I can do the exact same thing. That was probably a really bad example. But again, this is live, all right? What do you want from me? I am a person of average intelligence speaking for 5 hours straight. I'm just going to cut that out. You guys are never going to know what that was. Hi, YouTube. Did I say something stupid? Little bit. But again, it happens. Like I'm sitting here talking for hours on end. Some of the things I say are going to be stupid. Anyway, I understand nothing. I think this is so stupid. I think this guy has a lot of people who bought his book and too much sympathy for parents who did not seem to do a good job.
Parents' perspective, they've been good, loving parents. And when the child does this, for the parent to be able to say that the child owes them something, or that that the parent is ill or their family member is ill, and it'd be nice if the kid showed some interest or care or concern, that shouldn't be labeled as narcissism or manipulation. Or
it's never enough. And we're going to use the example of when Diane and Ted were sick, they got COVID, right? And Diane messaged her daughter and said, Daddy-o, I still hate that she calls him that. Daddy-o is sick. It would be really nice if you called him. And she did. Her daughter Haley called Ted. And then Diane went, and it was really nice, I guess. But she was just kind of like not there. It's never enough. It is never enough. Oh, I wish they would call me when I'm sick. They call you when you're sick. I just don't like the way that she just wasn't super present. Nothing you do is ever going to be enough for these people. And though they may give you examples of times when they're like, I just wish they'd call me. They do. Not enough. I just wish they would stop talking about me on Facebook. They do. Why don't they talk about me anymore?
Or self-centeredness, or that kind of thing. But it may well. So you have to be very judicious and cautious about using that. Again, mistake number one, is it fair? No. But staying with mistake number one, it's all about strategy, not about fairness. Fairness is going to get you every time.
This is how to get your child back without changing. This is how to manipulate your kid into letting you back into their life without having to change who you are as a person, without having to be anything different than the person that forced them away. And that's so gross. I hate that. Like, that's what you're going with, dude? I was so hopeful. I really was. I was so ready to be like, all right, here's someone who knows what they're talking about. But no, he's just another person who's like, your kids are stupid.
The more you're obsessed with it being fair, the more upset you're going to be and the less strategic you're going to be. Okay, well, there's plenty of things that can make your child feel guilty. But the last I'll mention is criticizing them or their spouse or their therapist in any way. That is also forbidden because particularly with criticizing your daughter-in-law or son-in-law, that's just going to cause your child to turn away from you, to be mad at you, to feel protective of that spouse. Not only that, but a lot of them are going to tell their spouse that that's what you did. And then you're going to be completely sunk because then the spouse is going to be mad at you too. And they're going to say to your child, well, you have to choose them or me. You can't have both. So that also just starts the foot in the quicksand. So guilt is incredibly important to understand and to get your hands around. because guilt is the thing that your child is going to use against you and is going to turn away from you. Again, remember, anything that makes your child feel bad is going to lengthen the period of time where there's conflict and distance with you. So really all of my strategies are predicated on that principle, that your task is to engage with your child in a way that doesn't raise their defensiveness, doesn't make them feel criticized, guilty, anxious, etc. Is it fair? No. But remember mistake number one. Okay, moving on after a sip of water.
Dude, I just don't get it. I don't get it. All we've learned so far is him being like, hey, fake it. And also, you can't reason with these people, dude. Kids, they're unreasonable. They're narcissists. That's why they call you a narcissist. They hit you with a no you, and then you go, me? Is it me? You don't want to do that to yourself. It's their fault, but don't tell them that. Don't let them know that you know. We're playing chess, not checkers. E4. They respond with E5. Okay. Not F3.
Mistake number 3 has to do with the way that you make amends to your child. Now, if you follow my work at all, you know that I make a big deal about the importance of writing an amends letter. And that's because in my research and in my clinical practice, I found that helping parents write a really good, solid letter of amends is really one of the most important active things that they can do to move the relationship towards reconciliation. Now, that said, there's really nothing I can say that's going to work every time for every child. Even if I write the most perfectly crafted amends letter, your kid may still not open the door. Why? They may be too influenced by the person that they're married to. They may be.
How did we get here? How did we get to once again not giving any sort of like credence to consider that this is just your fault? Consider that this is just your fault. Instead, they may be too influenced by their therapist or their spouse or by Bluey, the TV show. When Bluey says, "I'm Bluey," he's secretly saying, don't listen to your parents. They're bad people.
Too brainwashed or alienated by your ex. Their mental illness may make them unable to see you with any clarity. They may need to blame you for how their life turned out and feel and have a narrative that it's not their fault. Their life turned out poorly. It's your fault. Finally, they may need to maintain the estrangement because it's the only way they know how to feel separate from you. That one of the downsides of all the careful, conscientious, involved parenting that we've been doing over the past half century or so, particularly the last 3 or 4 decades, is that sometimes our kids get too much of us. And they don't know any other way to feel separate from us than to cut off contact with us. You know, I've heard more than one adult daughter say, I just need to cut off contact with my parent just so I can get her voice out of my head and hear my own voice. It's what I call lose your parent, find yourself. Or another way to think about it is sometimes the adult child has to forget about the parent in order to find them again. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, for some adult children, the parent just looms too large in their mind. So sometimes when they're diagnosing the parent, blaming them, shaming them, et cetera, it's really a way to shrink the influence that the parent has over their psychic life. But the parent just has too much, they're just too alive inside of them. So
that could come out in a lot of different ways. Like there are a lot of people who sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's good, not necessarily for it to be your parent, but to think about the way the things that you say and do might affect other people. That's fine. That's good. That should be normal. That's called empathy. It is not good to criticize yourself in the voice of someone else. And usually it's not a deserved criticism. It's not always, oh, I'm doing something wrong. It's if I order food, my mom's going to make me feel bad about wasting money. If I eat another slice of pizza, my mom is going to make a comment about my weight. If I go out and have fun, my dad's going to tell me I'm wasting time not making money. It's stuff like that. that we do not need.
Sometimes when adult children are going no contact or out of contact or rejecting the parent, it's partly really in the service of just feeling separate from that parent. And again, sometimes it's perfectly loving, well-meaning, highly conscientious parents. Sometimes it's parents who were, a little too anxious and the kid doesn't know any other way to separate themselves from that parent's anxiety other than to be completely removed from them. So in terms of writing an amends, one of my recommendations is always to start from speaking to the kernel of truth in the child's complaints. Now, maybe there were really serious mistakes and you can just write those easily.
I don't like the way he said speaking to the kernel of truth. Like there's one little thing that they're right about. I don't get it, dude. Like you are so convinced that your child is what, making all this up and wrong? At that point, why do you even want to force yourself into a relationship with them? Why do you want to force them into a relationship with you?
Made them, frankly. But either way, your amends have to be made in a very non-defensive, vigorous way where you don't try to qualify it. Now, what do I mean by qualify it? I mean, saying things like, well, I did the best that I could. That's for your self-dialogue. Remember before I was talking about self-dialogue versus the dialogue you have with your child? Your self-dialogue is, I did the best I could. Or, it's not my fault your dad was never there. Or, it was all your mom's fault that I left or that you have, been brainwashed against me. Or,
it's not my fault your dad was never there. But the person saying this is your dad. It's not my fault your dad left you to pursue a career in breakdancing, but you're my dad. Not my fault.
Or it was all your mom's fault that I left or that you have, been brainwashed against me. Or you were a difficult child. Or your memory of me or the past is all wrong. It's fine to say to yourself or to your friends or whomever, but that's not what you say to your child. Whether your child.
No, it's not. It's not fine to say to yourself or to your friends or to whomever, anyone other than your child. It's not. It is not. It is not. It is not. It is not. Imagine thinking your parent has grown and changed and is apologetic about the things that you went through or were put through. Is sorry about the things they put you through. This is who they present themselves as to you. And so you go, okay, yeah, let's try it. Let's try it again. But meanwhile, entire time, they're talking to the rest of their friends, your other family members and going, yeah, like, I don't really believe any of that stuff. I just, wanted to reconcile. I still don't think they should be marrying a non-white person, but I'm going to say it's fine so that they don't leave me. I don't know how you do it. But congratulations, I guess.
And again, this goes to what I was saying earlier about the importance of trying to lower their defenses is really just to seek to understand. And by that, I mean to be a co-investigator of their complaints. Now, it's particularly hard if your kid has been alienated against you because half the crap they're going to be saying about you, if not all of it, isn't even true, or even if it has a kernel of truth, has been completely blown up or inflamed by.
He's giving too much power to the parents to just be like, oh, yeah, I'm right. You just are. Like, you could have just swung right down the middle, dog, and I would have listened and I would have been like, okay, let's see where this goes. But to just encourage parents to manipulate their children, do you not see where the problem there is? Do you not see the problem in encouraging parents to manipulate their kids into reforming a relationship with them? And you can call it what you want. That's what it is. When you're lying to someone in order to form a relationship for your own benefit, that is, at the very least, manipulation.
By your ex, you still have to find some way to speak to it. Why? Because they believe what they believe. It never works ever to say, well, I think you're a victim of parental alienation. What child has ever been persuaded by that line? It's ridiculous. I mean, it's not.
It feels like he is talking to the 0.1% of people this may apply to. Because again, there's a very small percentage of people whose children have joined cults or been alienated for no reason. But that is, in a general sense, not who we're talking about or talking to. We're talking to people who had parents who were in some way not the best parents, whether that was emotionally abusive, physically abusive, neglectful, absent, whatever it was. That is the conversation that we're having. And to just hijack the conversation to make it about a situation that is not very common in order to enable the parents as a whole, it's an excuse that you're handing parents. No, you didn't do a bad job. Be prepared for them not to want to be around you, not because of who you are, but because they've been alienated from you by their spouse or by a therapist. No matter what, it's not your fault. Is a stupid way to talk to adults. And if there are people who can't find a way to realize that in some sort of way, it was at least a little bit theirs, and they just can't grow from that, those are people you can't help anyway. Like, you genuinely cannot help people who are never going to see that they're wrong. So what is the benefit in teaching them how to lie? And then you get to be like, oh, I was successful. They lied to the kid believed it, they came back. I got them back together. And then when it inevitably does not work out because you cannot uphold a lie for the rest of your life, you can't just pretend to be a good person for the next 25 years. So when it doesn't work out, you get to go, you tried, you did the best you could, you changed, and your child just showed you who they were. They couldn't accept it. So you just get to blame the people who shouldn't be blamed for the things that are worth blaming the parents over. This has to be so infuriating to the people whose children joined cults out of nowhere or developed real problems through no fault of anyone, who then were alienated from their kids, to hear you just be like, hey, lie to them.
That was so ridiculous that I don't understand how a parent could go there, because when a kid is alienated or estranged, we're all desperate to do whatever we can to move it towards resolution. But if your child has been brainwashed against you, they believe the brainwash. So that's what they're believing. So you can't just say it's not true, or that's what your dad said about me, but that's not what I did, or that's what your mom, put that crazy idea into your head. You're far better off if finding a kernel of truth in it, if you can find one. If not, saying something like, well, I don't recall it that way.
That's a problem.
But I'm interested in the fact that that those are your memories. So would you be open to going forward if I continue to act like that, or if I do it?
I don't remember punching you in the face. I maybe just remember pushing you off the bed and then stepping on you on my way down. But like, if you remember me punching you in the face, okay, maybe it happened. It's a terrible way to start any sort of conversation.
You'll let me know, or could we go into therapy and work on it, or try to address it together. Now, this is also a good technique if your child is diagnosing you. So many parents are getting diagnosed as narcissists and borderlines by their adult child. So let's say your kid goes, well, I've been in therapy and the therapist said that you're a narcissist, and I got on a website and 10 things that narcissistic mothers do, and you have all 10, and you just want to go, yeah, well, great. Thanks. Thank you, internet, for more propaganda. But you shouldn't say that. You have to meet them where they are. So you want to, as quickly as possible, get off the am I or am I not a narcissist.
There is no effective way to tell a narcissist that they're a narcissist. The absolute kindest way that you can say that to someone, right, is, hey, I was speaking to my therapist and I looked into it a little further. I think that you exhibit some traits of, would you be willing to go and talk to someone? And that's not going to work. So there's no middle between that and being like, you're a narcissist. There's just not. The people who do admit to being narcissists are the people that go, but everyone is. Like, yeah, I'm a narcissist, but so is everyone else. Like, it's human nature, bro.
Narcissist trap. You could say something like, well, I haven't really thought of myself as a narcissist, and I have been in therapy for it and haven't had that diagnosis, but I guess it's possible that I am. I don't know. Is there something that you'd like me to read? And they may have you read some book about narcissism. If they do, try to find like one thing that you can relate to. You could say, yeah, I did think that one part, I guess that did kind of speak. I could identify myself in that. You're already, just in saying that, you're saying basically, if your kid is healthy enough to have their mind change, and not all of them are, but if they are, you're now establishing a way to begin to work on things, to kind of say something like, well, yeah, I guess I could see that. Going forward, will you let me know other kinds of behaviors? Or if I do that in the future, or
This feels like the part where Diane probably said, it feels like it requires too much contrition. And it's not even real. He's in no way telling you to blame yourself. He's telling you to pretend to. And if pretending that you may have been wrong is too much for you, oh, dude, I don't know how to tell you. You're just not. You're just not. Just don't do it. Just don't let go of the idea of ever reconciling with your child. Just do it. Go meditate. Do anything but make more children. Make a voodoo doll of your kid and start poking it with pins and be like, I wish I could still do this to you in person. Like, leave people alone. If having a relationship with you is a punishment in and of itself, consider that you just shouldn't be allowed to have relationships with people. Yeah, hold a funeral for your kid, dude. What a great idea.
You have other memories that speak to this. And if they raise the other memories, your goal is not to prove them wrong, because you cannot prove them wrong. That's another failed.
Yeah, in the same way that you are never going to prove them wrong, you are never going to allow themselves to prove themselves right. Ever, ever, ever. You were abusive. No, I wasn't. Here's a video of you punching me in the face. It was one time. It's a video of you doing it again. Okay, maybe twice. Here's a video of you doing it again. Now you're just blaming me for things that didn't happen. It wasn't that bad. You are never going to allow them to prove themselves right, no matter what it is. This is just a book on how to victimize yourself so deeply and then lie to everyone around you to what? Continue to do it?
That's another mistake that I don't even have on my list here. So listen for it in future webinars. So you can't prove them wrong. You just want to find out why they believe what they believe. Now, some of these adult children don't tell the parent why they're not in contact. They just go no contact. They either write them a no contact letter, or they say, don't contact me, or they just disappear. Now, in those situations, it's maddening for parents, and parents feel like, well, how am I supposed to write an amends letter if I don't even know what I did and I can't even think of anything egregious enough to justify their cutting off contact with me? Well, in those situations, you write what I call the flush them out of the bushes letter. Now, the flush them out of the bushes letter goes like this: Dear son or daughter, I'm writing to see if there's a way to heal the distance between us. I know that you wouldn't have cut off contact unless it was the healthiest thing for you to do, even if you as the parent don't think it was the healthiest thing for them to do. It's clear that I have significant blind spots, that I don't have a better understanding of why you do need to do this. Given that, I'm wondering if you feel comfortable writing me or telling me more about what you think or feel so I can have a better understanding and try to work towards healing some of the distance that you're responding to in terms of my behavior. I promise to read or listen purely from the perspective of learning. And not.
This is unfortunately only ever going to turn into a power play, because if you are successful as one of them in having your child list out the reasons why they went no contact, you immediately grant yourself the power to shut it down. You get to say, nope, not true. Oh, that didn't happen. Oh, you're being dramatic. Oh, I thought you had a real reason. In the exact same way that Diane took the letter from Haley, pulled out one thing that she just thought was stupid and said, that's not really about me, even though it was. And then later in another video, she says something like, I didn't think any of her reasons were good enough. And that's all that is. A person who's willing to go no contact, a person who has been pushed to that point, is hopefully smart enough to recognize that, and hopefully smart enough to just not give up that power. It's not a power play to go no contact, but the estranged parents are going to make it that sort of an issue.
Not in any way to defend myself. Now, those letters often work. They don't always work for the same reason I said before that nothing always works, but they often do work. And they work because the parent, just in saying, I know you wouldn't do this unless it was the healthiest thing for you to do, removes it from kind of the space of the parent not feeling victimized, but the child knows that they're doing something hurtful. So if the parent is able to say, you wouldn't do it unless it was the healthiest thing for you to do, it puts the parent in alliance with the child's aspirations for a healthier relationship. And that's the moral framework of today's youth. You know, the idea of honor thy mother and thy father, respect thy elders, that ship has sailed, folks. That's been replaced by, actions which promote my growth, my happiness, and my mental health. If a relationship promotes those, then I'm interested. If it doesn't promote those in any way, then I'm not interested. And there's incredible social support out there for not being interested in continuing to have a relationship with anybody, parents included, who don't meet that criteria. So when you can speak in that language in your amends letter, you are showing your child that you're willing to be on their terms, that you're willing to take responsibility, you're willing to play ball in the way that they're constructing reality. And you do that by speaking to the kernel of truth. Now, maybe you know the bushel of truth. Maybe you don't know any of the truth, but often there is a kernel of truth in our children's complaints about this. So
my biggest problem with the whole like kernel of truth thing is that sometimes people are willing to give up a little bit of contrition if it means they can avoid the rest of it. They're like willing to take a plea bargain to what they're guilty of. Again, we have Diane, we have Don, and we have breakdancing dad as examples. Diane was willing to be like, maybe I didn't buy her that candy that she wanted. That was her like honoring the kernel, right? Don was able to be like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said these things. They all have a but. Diane's but was, but I raised it, I fed it, I did everything right. There were more pros and cons. Don's but was, but I had a concussion, it's not my fault. It is not enough to get your narcissistic parents to admit to 1% of what happened, because then they're going to use that as an excuse to minimize or completely disregard the other 99%. But for your parent to be like, well, I didn't buy you that candy, sorry. That gives them an excuse to avoid the, well, I also, voted for a man who wants to eradicate your people, or voted for someone who wants to make sure that you don't have reproductive rights, or I was terrible to you and your wife, and I was going to be that person around your child. Or no. Like, it doesn't matter that I didn't see you because I live down the street. You could have seen me anytime you wanted. It doesn't matter that I'm the parent.
So that's critically important. Now, the reason I'm talking about mistake number 3 as being qualifying your amends with too much defensiveness or explanation is because you're going to ruin an otherwise good effort in trying to make amends with your adult child. If you say things like, I was going through a hard time, I did a lot better job than my parents did with me, or you're making it a lot worse than it really was, or what about last year when you told me I was the best dad or the best mom ever, or what about all the wonderful times we had, or what about all the ways that I sacrificed for you, or don't you have any good memories of me or our relationship or whatever. They're just going to shut you down. They're just going to think that you're not a credible person to deal with, and they're just going to go further and further away from you. So again, this goes back to the notion of self-dialogue versus the dialogue you have with your child. You tell yourself, I did the best I could. You tell yourself it's not my fault because the other parent wasn't a good partner. You tell yourself, yeah, well, you were a difficult kid to raise if they were. You tell yourself, well, your memory of me is all wrong. I was a much better parent than you're recalling or even that you were saying a while ago. So you're going to have to soothe yourself. Your kid isn't going to do it. And they're not going to tell you were a good parent, or they're not going to be even in touch necessarily with all the memories of all the good things that you did and all the videos you have of them smiling and laughing and all the things that break your heart to look at. Now, again, mistake number 1, it's not fair. If it were fair, you'd get empathy, you'd get understanding, you'd get dedication. Your child would be willing to reassure you, but they're just not going to do it. So
I'm annoyed by this like idea of fairness, because there are plenty of things, and I talked about this already, where I can look at my mom and I go, not your fault. 100% not your fault. You financial situation, not your fault. Also being abused by my father, not your fault. Terrible situation to be in, and I'm so sorry that you're in that situation. There are plenty of things that do not excuse the relationship between us. And it's not that people aren't willing to have empathy for their parents. It's that you cannot excuse the bad things you did. You can't hurt people because you're traumatized. You just can't. You can't use your mental health to as you can't use your mental health as an excuse to hurt people. You can't be like, out of concussion, so now I'm going to say awful things to you for the next 6 years. And then when you finally say something about it, not my fault. It was a concussion. You just can't. These are things you can't do. You can empathize with those situations. Like with Don. It sucks that you had a concussion and that probably did affect you. That sucks. Mine affected me. My concussions affected me. But that's not an excuse to be a bad person to other people. The empathy extended to you is when things happen to you and when things are going bad for you and things that may have not been your fault. It is not your place to be empathetic towards anyone who is hurting other people. Who does that help? The person that hurts other people?
Oh, what you say to your child is different from what you say to yourself. What you say to yourself is to soothe yourself in the same way that if you were a loving parent would to yourself as a child. You're tender, you're forgiving, you're empathic to yourself. If you did make big mistakes, you have compassion to yourself for why you made those mistakes.
So much of this could be avoided if the level of compassion you have for yourself as a bad parent was extended to your child.
Don't frame them in a way of like, oh, you should have known that, or you were too harsh, or no wonder your kid isn't talking to you, or of course they rejected you. Everybody rejects you. No, you think...
of course they rejected you. Everybody rejects you. Nerd. I bet you wear glasses, dude. 4 eyes, bifocals, 8 eyes, 6 eyes, right? Technically, because it's 4, like here, and then you're 2. 6 eyes.
You talk to yourself in the way that you would if you were being, a very kind and loving parent to your own inner child. So one of the way that you would if you were being, a very kind and loving parent to your own inner child. So one of the ways to think about this is to think about it from the perspective of separate realities. The separate realities is the idea that you could objectively been a great parent.
I don't like that. I don't like where this is going. I'm going to let him talk for a second.
Or anybody who watched you growing up could have felt and observed you to be and evaluated to you have been a great parent. But your child may have viewed you differently. They might have needed something more from you. And I call it the separate realities because in every family, if you have a family member of of 5 people, there's probably going to be 5 different realities of what the family was like, what the parents were like, what childhood was like. I mean, I have 2 brothers. We have very different memories of my parents, who they were, kind of based on our birth order and our temperaments and our personalities and what we evoked.
He's missing the point that he just made. We have different ideas of who our parents were based on our birth order. Your parents treated you differently, and that's why you have a different idea of who they were. You don't live in separate realities. If I have 2 people and I'm really, really mean to one of them, and this pop socket in my hand is really, really nice to the other, they're going to say that I'm 2 different people. One of them will describe me as mean. One of them will describe me as nice. We don't live in different realities. I treat them differently. There is one relationship between a parent and their child. There are different parts of it. There's a public part. There's a private part. There's a part that no one gets to see. My mom was very different in public than in private. And in public, she's a wonderful person. Oh, such a great person. Not who she is in private. That's not a different reality. That's who she is. For you to excuse the way people treat other people by saying they probably just remember it wrong is stupid. And that is a dumb way to reconcile anyone. Tell them they remember it wrong. No, you didn't do anything wrong. They're remembering it wrong. Tell them that. They're probably just remembering it wrong. Tell them that you understand that they remember it wrong. Tell them that you understand that they feel like maybe in some way you could have been neglectful. I'm sorry if you feel that way. Does this help? Does this help? Does this help? Dr. Joshua Coleman.
Our parents, etc. So you don't want to get too much into the rightness or the wrongness of it. If your child says, you were X, Y, or Z to me, and I needed you to be different, into the rightness or the wrongness of it. If your child says, you were X, Y, or Z to me, and I needed you to be different, just accept that they might have needed something different from you than you were, able to give or able to see. But
this goes into all relationships, but it's again giving them too much freedom to say that they didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes in relationships, both people could be good people. Nothing wrong could have happened. You just need something different. Whatever that may be. You may need someone who wants to be home more and work less. You may need someone who cares more about saving money. You may need someone who wants children and you don't. And you're both great people, but there's just something there that's not going to work out. That's fine. You're allowed to want different. You're allowed to separate because of it. But when you're a parent and a child and the child says, I needed something different, what then? Do you tell them that you tried your best? If that's true, they'll probably accept it. But if when they mean different, they mean, I needed a parent who was willing to spend time with me. I needed a parent who showed that they cared about me. I needed a parent who was willing to hug me because now people try and touch me and it scares me. Like, those are real problems. And are you just going to nod your head? Because that's what he's been saying. He's been saying, nod your head, tell them they're right, even though they're not, and move on. That feels gross. That just feels gross. That just feels gross. I don't want to be lied to. And I don't care in what situation. I would rather I would rather you just come out and say awful things about me, about the world. I just want to know who you are. And if who you are and who I am are compatible, fantastic. But if not, I don't want to lie my way towards an eventual breakup anyway. That doesn't mean we need to know everything about each other's pasts or every thought we've ever had, or if we've ever hurt people in ways that we think are wrong, I guess. But if it's an idea that you still have, or it's something that you're doing a good job of hiding, maybe don't hide it. You should be who you are, whether that's good or bad. Try and find a community in which you fit in. You'll find one anyway. I don't care how bad of a person you are, you'll find a space. You don't have to force people who just want you to be a good person into your life. You don't have to force yourself into theirs by lying.
Don't get into the right or wrongness of it. Don't try to.
Also that, it's so stupid to me to be like, you know what? It doesn't matter who's right and who's wrong.
Respond from your perspective. Try to respond from their perspective, meaning that you say something like, yeah, I get it. You really felt that I wasn't as involved with you as you wished I'd been. Now, you may have been the most involved parent in the world, objectively, but your kid's saying, yeah, you weren't as involved as I needed you to be. You can just say, yeah, you felt that way. Not you felt that way and you're ridiculous, or you felt that way and good luck finding a more involved parent. No, you felt like that, and that was hurtful to you, and I'm really sorry and sad to hear that.
I'm sorry if you felt like I did that. I'm sorry you feel that way does not help anyone. Just apologize or don't, but don't lie.
It's clear that I have blind spots, that I didn't know that that's what you were going through or felt that way at the time. I can see now how it might have felt like that. So
a big issue here is that these are probably not revelations. Sometimes people don't understand things until they're told by a specific person that it was wrong, whether that's a therapist or like their parent or like a very close friend. And so it doesn't matter how many times your child has told you, hey, I don't like that you did this. It will matter when your own parent or your friends are like, oh, you do that? Weird, dude. Yeah, you should apologize to your kids for that. But at that point, is it too late? At what point is it too late? I don't care if after the 50th time you finally go, oh yeah, my bad. You should have done it the first time. At worst, the second.
Again, look, These kids can say really hurtful, stupid, critical, contemptuous, arrogant, self-righteous things. And frankly, I'm appalled by the way a lot of these kids talk to their parents. And I feel very protective of the parents in my practice and all of the other ones that are going through this that I've never met and never will.
One of the reasons that he feels, actually the main reason he's going to feel protective over the parents and not anywhere near as much with the kids is because he's the parent in this situation. Like he was estranged from his child. I don't know anything about the child. We know that he was estranged once. In the same way that I'm the opposite, right? Like I very rarely give a lot of credit to the parents. And I very rarely go, oh, but they did try their best, whatever. Like we're two different people in this situation on two different sides, two different experiences. I think if you're going to be a therapist, I think if you're going to go out of your way to write a book about this and to engage in the community and to say that you're helping people, that you do have to do a better job of being in the middle. As much as you want to help reconcile the relationship, you have to make sure that it's a healthy one. It is not enough to convince the parents to lie their way back into the lives of their children, because then it's just going to split again. You have to find a way to mend the actual relationship.
But we have to think about it from the perspective of if our goal is reconciliation, then you have to get an understanding of what was their motivation and what is their motivation for continuing it. As mean and harsh and cruel as it feels, I don't think most of them do it out of some sense of sadism. I mean, maybe a couple are, but in general, I think they're doing it because they're trying to master something. They're either trying to survive with their spouse or form an alliance with their other parent in the case of alienation who they couldn't get enough from otherwise, or they're trying to not be triggered because their mental illness makes them feel like they're constantly on the verge of falling apart, or they don't know any other way to feel separate from you than to reject you. So they're trying to communicate something that's important to them. And the more that you can seek to understand, the better off you're going to be. The more you're going to move it towards reconciliation. Secondly, and more subtly, they're trying to sort out the past, and they can only do it by blaming you and kind of seeing what you do with it. If we get too reactive, too defensive, too angry, they don't really have an opportunity to actually see it. If we kind of go, well, maybe you're right there. Maybe you're onto something. I could see how you could have felt like that. They can relax. They can take a deep breath. They can lower.
The gross thing about this is he's not opening a conversation. He's not saying, hey, give up a little bit of this so that they're willing to talk. He's teaching parents how to lull their children into a false sense of security so that the parents can then manipulate them into a relationship, which is beyond disgusting. And I don't know how that helps anyone.
Or their defenses. In reality, the more that we push back, the more that we defend, the more that we deny, the more that we get angry in response, the more they're just going to escalate their complaints, the more fantastic the complaints and the memories are going to be. I've seen in letters and correspondence from adult children that sometimes they start out quite reasonably, but the more the parent denies, the more agitated the adult child comes, and the more harsh the complaints about the parent becomes. Mm-hmm. The more that we can meet them where they are and find some kind of common ground, the more they're going to be able to relax and see you with some degree of objectivity. Now, parents often ask me, well, do they even have access to their good feelings or memories about me? And what I commonly think is, well, probably not when they're in the midst of an alienation or estrangement. But if you can be engage with them in a way that doesn't cause them to feel defensive or criticized or shamed or pushed away or made to feel guilty or stupid, then they're far more likely to lower the defenses that are keeping them from seeing you in a good way or seeing all the good, loving things that you did for them as a parent or as a person. So another reason that adult children say really critical, hurtful, cruel things is that they're just trying to separate, and they don't know any other way to feel separate from you than to put a wedge between you and them. And it's sort of a way of having a boundary. If they were healthier and better off, they'd be able to say what, a handful of adult children can say, which is, look, I just need more time. It isn't your fault. I just need some time to be on my.
You're expecting way too much out of the kids. Like, these are not always people who are young, but a lot of people who are young, and expecting them to be able to just articulate everything they need and want so well when you these parents specifically can't do that is a very weird expectation to have. Especially when a lot of these parents are like, well, my generation doesn't talk about their feelings.
I own you didn't do anything wrong. I'll be back in touch when I'm able to. Some are able to do some version of that. Most can't. Most have to blame the parent in the same way that when people get divorced, they may just feel like the marriage has outlived its usefulness and they'd just be better off separating. Instead, they have to say how terrible the other person was and how neglectful they were and blah, blah, blah. Well, the same is true if an adult child needs, for whatever reason, to feel separate.
There's a bit of a red flag that I look for in the way that people talk about the people they no longer speak to, whether that's a parent or like a former spouse or former partner. There's a big difference in being able to say, this is a situation that me and my ex went through. This is how it went, regardless of who's the bad guy in that situation, right? It's different to say that my ex was abusive than to say, oh, my crazy ex. You should look for the people that have a million crazy exes and then like, that's the extent of it, because that's a big red flag. But you should also be able to talk about the times that you were with someone who was not the best for you, or that you had a parent who like did certain things that weren't great. It is entirely different to be like, yo, I hate my parents, than to be like, one time my mom flipped the lock in my bedroom door and then locked me in there for 2 days. And I was only allowed to eat bread. And also she brought me a Pepsi.
And again, sometimes we've given our kids too much. And I don't mean materially, we've just given them too much love or tenderness or attention. And they're like, enough already. I need to sort of figure out who I am.
Brother, it's been 6 seconds. Sometimes we love them too much. That as parents, we just love them too much. That's our fault.
On my own without your help. And that's why I've heard more than once this idea that I don't know any other way to get my parents' voice out of my head than to separate, than to just be completely estranged. Okay, moving on. Mistake number 4. Mistake number 4, if you haven't already figured it out, is returning fire with fire.
I don't like being able to hear like all of his gulps and all of his breaths, but I'm glad he doesn't have like the loud room static that the last few have had.
I hope I've made it clear that I totally get how any parent who's going through estrangement or alienation has a right to be furious. When you're going through it, you feel devalued, misunderstood, shamed, humiliated, rejected, kicked to the curb, your child has taken the most vulnerable, tender part of you and rubbed your nose in it. You feel blame for things that you never.
I don't know how to explain to you that the child is not punishing the parent. The child is exploring their life.
Did or said, or if you did say or do them, should be fairly balanced out by all the loving, dedicated things that you did as a parent over your many years of parenting. So a lot of parents wonder, should I even keep trying? And as I've said, a lot of these kids are frankly abusive. They're abusive in their blame, in their coldness, in their lack of empathy, in their contempt. And of course, that can create enormous pain in the parent. And pain often leads to anger, or anger can lead to rage. But if your goal is reconciliation, then you're not doing yourself any favors by getting mad at your adult child. Now, this is often where friends or therapists of the estranged parent make a mistake, and that is encouraging them to be more assertive. I mean, there's a way to be assertive that keeps the conversation going, but that's if it's done very calmly and lovingly. But a lot of parents...
All right, I was going to let him talk for a minute, but frankly, these kids are abusive. These are children who are estranged from their parents. So children who, for whatever reason, right? We don't have any specific reasons. We have specific reasons from other people that we've looked at. But from him, he's speaking to parents who want to reconcile with their children who have been estranged from them. And he, in a very not roundabout way, is saying, lie to them. He is making sure the parents know that they did nothing wrong, but to have that relationship, they need to pretend that they did. And that's stupid. These children are not abusive. They're not. That's not the power dynamic you have. Do some people do 1%? Maybe? Sure. But again, we're not talking about the 1%. We're not talking about the people who join cults. We're not talking about the people whose parents are disabled or who are under control financially from their kids. It's not what we're talking about. We're talking about children who grew up being abused in some way or neglected, and then decided not to have a relationship with their parents. And then the parents are reaching out to them over and over again, trying to not fix that, but to go back to the way it once was, which is the problem. Why are you trying to go back to an issue rather than trying to fix it? And his whole thing is, to fix it, you have to pretend it's real. And you have to give up a little bit. You can dig through all of their issues. You can dig through their letter. You can dig through everything they've said has been a problem. And I want you to pick one thing that might kind of be true and start there. And then go, oh yeah, you're right. Maybe I did this one thing, but I was a good parent. So, we can reconcile now. I was very hopeful. I was so hopeful that this dude was just going to like find some place in the middle to sit and be like, there are problems on either side. Let's talk about them. But no, he's like, I'm going to show you how to lie to your kids because they're stupid and you're not.
I feel like, well, I'm just not going to take that crap and they can't push me around and they can't treat me like that. But if you have that attitude where you're just going to kind of, treat fire with fire.
Keep in mind that Diane and Ted said the same thing, that they were like, oh, she doesn't care about us. She doesn't care about how this makes us feel. She's the evil one. When Haley, their daughter, was just like out living their life, did not say anything about them, did not respond, was just out there living her life. That's exactly what this is. They're not getting their way, so they just throw a little temper tantrum that they decide needs to be everybody's business.
Your child is just going to escalate. First of all, they probably don't have any idea that they're making you feel as horribly as they're making you feel. So you're just going to stir yourself up and you're not going to respond well. And all the research says that the more stirred up we are, the less we're able to even think clearly. So you're better off working on soothing yourself if you're going to have an interaction with your child that's coming up. So you might want to write out everything that you want to say if you're going to have an interaction with them. That's why, or even write them if you think that you're not going to be able to respond in a good way. If your child does do or say something that makes you furious, try to get out of the interaction as quickly as you can. If you feel your temperature rising, you might say something like, well, I suspect this isn't going to be very productive. Maybe I should go. If you want, we can talk about this later, but make sure that you're sort of exiting the interaction before you get too angry.
I'm just like imagining one of the parents being like, hey, I know it's been a while. Can we find time to talk? I think I've learned a lot and would like to just see where this goes. And the kid being like, yeah, let's do that. Let's meet up somewhere public. You do. 2 sentences in, the parent goes, you know what? I don't think it's going to be productive. I came here so that you could apologize to me. But you're not doing that, so I'm wasting my time.
Or upset. Now, I know a lot of you have no contact whatsoever and would probably be glad to even have angry contact from your child. But so I highlight these mistakes.
Have you tried just like reaching out to your kids and being like, if you don't answer me, you're gay? Because now they have to answer. Otherwise, they're gay, dude. Like, they have to answer now. This is just my way of saying that this is stupid. If you don't answer me, you're 4 eyes and you wear glasses. If you don't answer me, dude, yeah, 10 years of bad luck. Like, it's so dumb. I just don't know. It's like so unserious now. I really wanted this guy to have something to say, but he's just one of them.
Mistakes and how to respond to them, because a lot of times when parents start to do the techniques that I recommend, their child does come back in contact. But sometimes they come back in contact with guns blazing. They come back in contact with a letter that says, I'm willing to reopen contact, but first you have to do, this legal pad full of requirements. And often that can kind of put things on the wrong foot. So you want to have these things really in mind so that when your child does come back into contact with you, you're able to respond in a productive way. And other ways you can respond are to say you need to take a time out, try to actively slow down your breathing, count to 10 before you respond, don't reinitiate contact until you're calm. use I statements. I statements, for example, are, when you call me names, I feel really misunderstood, rather than you're such a selfish little brat. How can you treat me like that? Or to try to speak to what you think the child's motivation is. You might say something like, well, I think you're really trying to get me to see something that you think is really important for me to understand. And maybe you feel like you have to hit me over the head with it in order for me to get it. And maybe, in the past, I've given you cause to feel like that. I don't know.
Something that I appreciate about this man is that he's at least sitting down and speaking on what he believes. I don't know if this is what he did to reconcile with his child, but he's saying, hey, lie to them. Just lie to them. They're never going to admit it's their fault. Obviously, it wasn't ours. Lie to them. And then he gives an hour-long speech about it. Cool. Thank you for telling us who you are. With people like Dawn, nothing's her fault. And she's never going to say that. With Diane, she used it as a marketing opportunity to say, oh, man, my kid left me because I voted for Trump. I'm going to show you how to be a good parent. And then when her videos stopped getting views, she stopped posting.
Head with it in order for me to get it. And maybe, in the past, I've given you cause to feel like that. I don't know. But it's actually very hard for me to concentrate on what you're saying when you yell at me or you're calling me names. So do you think that you could just try telling me in a calm way? I promise to listen and to respond better than I did in the past. So those are some techniques if you find yourself getting too angry. But just remember that not only is guilt not your friend, returning fire with fire is also not your friend. There's no upside to it. Yeah, you're going to feel better for like a minute after you get it off your chest and finally tell your kid off or their spouse off about how terribly they've treated you and how unfair it all is, but it is only going to push your child away. Back to mistake number one. Is that fair? No. It's not fair at all. If your kid's being hostile towards you, it's human nature to be hostile back.
It's so stupid to just start the video by emphasizing that the parent is a victim and then hold their hand through the rest of this.
A little bit of a temper myself. So, for me, when my kids have been mad at me, I've gotten mad back. And I'm sure part of my estrangement was in part a result of that. So over time, I've learned to become much more mellow. I'm in California. It's easy to learn how to be mellow in California, but I've learned how to respond not out of my anger and to self-soothe so that I don't respond out of anger. And it just works so much better.
How easily do you get angry? I don't ever respond to anyone out of anger. And I know that I'm very much on the opposite side of that, but is it that hard to just not be mad at the people who are actively in your life? It's so cute when they have to learn to bottle up their anger. Yeah, grow up. Dude, you're 70. I can't believe these parents need this advice. I'm assuming they have had jobs before or friendships where there's conflict and they've had to stay calm. Is it just their kids that can't keep their heads? I think it's a control and power thing. It's different to be with a coworker than it is to be over somebody that you're supposed to have full authority over and then they don't listen to you. I think it's just that a lot of these parents just have control issues. And when they're not able to control you, they get mad about it. So then it makes sense, right? The beginning, lie to them to control this relationship. And we make a big circle.
Okay, moving right along. Mistake number 5, failing to see how long reconciliation takes or not seeing the progress that is occurring. In general, reconciliation is typically a marathon. It's not a sprint. Sometimes parents start to do the strategies that I recommend, and the child responds right away, to an amends letter, and say things like, wow, that's the letter that I always hoped that you would send me.
Does that not feel gross that your kid is wow, yes, thank you. This is what I wanted. But you were lying. The whole point of the amends letter is to say things that you did not mean for the sake of getting a conversation with your kid.
Really understood and heard. Yes, let's meet. Yes, let's talk. I do see that sometimes, but I don't always. Sometimes the child totally ignores the parent, or they pick apart the amends letter, or they don't say anything to it, but maybe a few months later, they'll start responding. But either way, it's typically a marathon and not a sprint. So I don't want anybody to have the idea that if you do make a few good steps, then, the Red Sea is going to part. It might, but it's just as likely that it might not. So sometimes there are little glimmers of light along the way, little crumbs. And as one estranged mother said to me, well, I don't want to take, these crumbs and try to make a 3-layer cake out of them. And I understand that feeling, that it's hard to feel very excited if you get one text, a year, or you get a happy Mother's Day or Father's Day card, and then your kid goes back to being underground for another 6 to 8 months or whatever. It's hard to see those as little glimmers of light or hope, but I think it's useful for you to be able to see them as little glimmers of light or hope. And that your child, if they haven't blocked you or sent out a restraining order, particularly if they'll occasionally take a phone call or their spouse will.
Sometimes kids can't block you for multiple reasons. If there's a sibling that they need updates about, like if something happens to their sibling and you're the only person that would tell them, they can't block you.
That over time, that could be something that you can build into something more meaningful. Now, that doesn't mean if you're not getting any of those, as I know is true often, that all is lost. It just means that if you're getting those little things, those are little kind of lights in the sand that you can use to keep going in that direction. Now, a question that I often get from parents, and this is kind of related to mistake number 4, returning fire with fire, is when do I get to say how I feel? When do I, the answer is, well, you can say it whenever you want to say it, but what's your goal? If your goal is reconciliation, saying how you feel probably isn't going to buy very much interest or move towards reconciliation.
I'm such a big believer in telling people who it is you are and what you think. Period. I'm such a big believer in telling people who it is that you are and what you think. That way we know whether or not these are people that we can have a relationship with. I will lay out all of my beliefs, all of them, and I'm okay. There's nothing that I say in private that can't be said in public. But if you're hiding the fact that you're racist or that you don't care about your children at all, or all these tiny, tiny things, all these things that you think aren't that big of a deal, but they are to other people, maybe just tell them who you are. Why do I keep going back to the Holocaust? I've been watching that vegan teacher too much. Like if you were Jewish in the Holocaust, you were hiding that, but you were hiding that because, you were being persecuted. No one's persecuting you for being like racist. We just don't want to associate with those people. If you have problematic ideas, or you just don't believe that your kids deserve to be their own people, those are things you should say out loud so that we know not to interact with you.
From your child, I get how any parent would want to say it. I have supported parents who've given up on their adult child because they just do feel too fed up, too sick of being mistreated, too sick of being treated like a file around their grandparents, the grandchildren, despite the fact that they were very loving, tender, involved grandparents. So
we're not going to get an explanation, but I want to know how you are. I'm genuinely asking, how do you treat someone like around their grandchildren? Like there are boundaries that you set, right? That we saw in that video that I didn't know about until the process of watching the video. I didn't know that you weren't supposed to kiss babies. I don't hold babies. I don't want to hold a baby, but I didn't know not to kiss a thing, right? So what is it that you're doing that makes you feel like you're being treated like a file? I don't get it. I cannot imagine a situation in which you're not doing something of that nature where someone is going, oh, you're acting like you're being that one came out of nowhere.
So I totally understand and can support a parent who goes, you know what, enough is enough. I'm not going to keep trying. But, if you make that decision, I recommend that you just let the line go cold and don't tell your child that you're going to do it. Why? Because I think you want it to invite more self-reflection, meaning I think you want them to be able to be curious about why you're suddenly not in contact or why you've let the line, why you've gone no contact. You want them to be able to say, it's been 8 months. Usually I hear from my mother or father more often than that. Or it's been a year. Oh, that's right. I've told them I wanted to go no contact. Well, do I really want to go no contact? Let me think about it. Whereas if we're kind of constantly circling, above them with the occasional gifts or, texts or whatever, they may never have enough time to kind of calm themselves down. So that's why for some parents, particularly those who've gotten restraining orders sent or threats of getting attorneys or the police, or they just get completely enraged every time the parent reaches out to them, I typically recommend that those parents let the line go cold for at least a year. And sometimes that can work for the following reasons. One is that it may cause the adult child to feel like the parent is actually respecting their wishes, to not be in contact, and that may allow them to get something that they rightly or wrongly feel like they need. So it may cause them to respect the parent more because the parent isn't continuing to just throw good energy after bad. That old saying, how can I miss you if you never go away, is also true in family relationships. So if the parent stops being in contact and lets the line go cold, then the child may actually miss the parent, may invite more self-reflection and cause them to think more about the parent more than they might otherwise. So if we're constantly circling above them with, in the many ways that we can, they may be constantly triggered and made defensive by that. So in some ways, you're giving them a gift by just going completely out of contact if it's been a while. Now, I don't recommend parents do that with minors, but with adult children, I do recommend that. Okay. Mistake number 6, assuming that their distance or negativity is all about you.
Yeah, I'm glad we got there. I like being alone so much. I like being alone so much more than I like being around people. And sometimes when I don't message back for a few days, there are some people who freak out about it. And they're like, what's happening between us? What did I do? And I'm just like, I found a new artist that I like listening to, and I've been listening to her albums nonstop for the last 3 days. Did not even realize that today was a Monday. Her name was, what's her name? Flower? Specifically the Girl Prometheus album from Flower Pace. That being said, it's not about you. Like, people's actions are typically not about you. Sometimes people just need space. Sometimes people like space. Sometimes people want to be alone or left alone. And that may mean alone with a partner, alone with a friend, alone away from you. You being a very common pronoun for the world outside of their immediate circle. It's not about you. And if you're going to take people's actions that have nothing to do with you as a personal attack, you should figure that out. You should figure out what it is about you that so desperately wants the world around them to be about you, but not a consequence of you. You should assume that nothing is ever about you. You just should. Otherwise, you're going to be very anxious and you're going to make it other people's problems.
The reality is that, by the time we have adult children or grandchildren, our children and grandchildren really become, in many ways, the center of our lives. We may have good marriages and friendships and careers and interests, et cetera. But in terms of what we're most likely to be preoccupied by, it's probably our adult children and our grandchildren. If it's going well, the joys and pleasures. If it's going terribly, the heartache and pain and sorrow of it. But we're very preoccupied with them. They're not very preoccupied with us. I mean, I was fortunate enough to have good, loving parents, but I always knew when I called them or visited them that it was far more meaningful to them than it was to me. For them, it was like the highlight of their days, not because I'm so amazing, but just I think that's the way parents feel. Whereas for the adult child, there's a certain amount of checking a box, even if they're fond of their parents.
So this is a really easy topic to touch when you're talking about romantic relationships, because you should find someone who wants to be around you as much as you want to be around them. And if you are someone who only wants to see their partner once or twice a week, and they want to see you every day, or the other way around, You may make it last, but it's not going to be enjoyable. You should find someone who wants to be around you as much as you want to be around them. When you have children, they don't have that choice. That's immediately a relationship. And you can't be like, oh, they like being alone? Well, I don't. So I'm going to force them to be with me. That's a problem. Oh, they want to be with me a lot? Well, I, turns out, don't like my kids. So instead, I'm going to lock myself in this bedroom and they can go do whatever. It's a problem. You unfortunately have to adapt to the needs of your child. And that is part of being a parent. That is a contrition of your own life for the benefit of having a child to raise. And if asking you to give up a part of yourself to raise a child and to raise them in a healthy manner is too much, then you should not be a parent. Now, there are plenty of reasons why you're going to have children anyway, whether it's an accident or you didn't realize this about yourself and it's too late. But you really just have to do it. It's like anything else. It's freezing. I'm from Southern California. Anytime it dips under 65 degrees, I am actually freezing. I hate going outside right now. It snows here, and it's windy, and I keep sneezing. But Toast, who's lying down on the floor right now, needs to go out multiple times a day. So I take her. I zip up my jacket. I go, oh, I should have worn a shirt today. I put my hands in my pockets and I go, all right, hurry up for half an hour. Multiple times a day. That's part of me having the benefit of raising this thing. Congrats on being a parent. Why are you choosing to be a bad one?
Our adult children are far more preoccupied with their own marriages or their divorces or their own.
And they should be. Surprise. People care about their own lives much more than they care about the lives of other people in a very healthy way.
Own children or building their careers or developing them or their own social lives. As parents, frankly, we're pretty far down the list. So what can happen, though, is we start complaining about it and particularly feeling like our children owe us more and should be more available and much more responsive to us. That's when we make them feel guilty. And now we are into a fight with them. And now you are going to get much more complaints about you than you might not have gotten otherwise. So it's so easy when we're going through an estrangement or an alienation to assume that everything, all the distance or the non-responsiveness is about us or it comes from an angry or rejecting place in them. But it may have little to nothing to do with that. It may be much more a function of their preoccupation with their own lives and that kind of thing. Okay, so in the remaining 5 minutes or so here, I want to talk a little bit about the, let's say that your child does reconcile with you for a variety of reasons. Well, one of the things that parents often...
I'm afraid that this teaches people how to manipulate their children into a relationship with them, but it's not teach them how to maintain that relationship at all. Congratulations. You finally got your kid to come back to you by lying to them. You did it. You're done. You've reached the end point. Now go do exactly what you did that made them leave.
Say or feel in early reconciliation is that they feel like they're walking on eggshells. So, and it feels really phony to them or awkward or, difficult to maintain. And what I constantly tell parents is, well, yeah, you should be walking on eggshells. You know why? Because any kid who would do that to a parent once is perfectly capable of doing that to them again. And
you're not a victim. You're just not. You're really not. Any child who's been pushed to finally leave their situation with their parents can once again be pushed to do so. Narrative matters. The words you say and the way you say them matters a lot. And if you wanted to find a way to just stick in the middle, I would have given you that. That's fine. But this man has spent an hour and 4 minutes of our time, actually 3 hours and 52 minutes of our time because I talk too much, blaming children, which is just, I want you to notice again how in every situation when we've had a child speak, an adult child speak, they're able to say, this is what happened, and give you a really good example or multiple examples of things their parents have done. Anytime we've heard one of the parents talk, including him, Diane, Don, they're really good at just being like, oh, those kids, they suck. Oh, they're just, like they just want to make you feel bad. Oh, like they're terrible people. I can't believe they did this to you. And not once can they be like, here's a situation that actually happened. Yeah, it is guilt tripping children into letting you back into their lives.
It's not super uncommon that if a kid does go no contact with a parent once, that they do it again for a variety of different reasons. So if you feel like you're walking on eggshells, that's because your kid is perfectly capable of doing it again. Some kids, no matter what their complaints were about their parent, would never estrange their parents. Most of us would never have estranged our parents, no matter how badly we were treated. Whereas
that's very true. And I know plenty of people who just can't give their parents up, who hate it, who hate having to talk to them, having to hang out with them, hate so many parts of it, come back feeling drained and powerless and so sad. But those are their parents. And I'm not going to tell you how to live that relationship. I'm not here to tell you what relationship to have with your parents. I'm here to tell you to keep other people safe from them. And this guy's here to tell you that that's the relationship you should want.
As this, generation of adult children has been given that kind of key to the kingdom of estrangement. So those who can do it once could easily do it again. So if you feel like you're walking on eggshells, that's because some part of your mind is telling you that it would be foolish not to. It would be foolish to act like, okay, everything's back to normal. I can call you as much as I want. I don't have to be that careful about whatever is going to trigger you or upset you or et cetera, crossing your boundaries or gaslight you, whatever it is. I can just be myself. Well, guess what? No, you can't. Because if your kid did it once, they could do it again. The causes of estrangement aren't typically completely resolved. They could get re-triggered. And also your feelings of hurt or anger about the estrangement may push your child away.
If being who you are forces your child to be estranged from you, consider that the problem may be who you are.
So how do you stop walking on eggshells? Well, the first way to do it is just to acknowledge that it's reasonable that you feel that way. Don't shame yourself for it. Don't worry about it. Your kid has just put you through a major trauma. Of course, you're walking on eggshells and you're afraid of your child, but you have to turn toward it rather than turn away from it. This goes to the notion of radical acceptance that I was talking about earlier. You need to expect that it's going to be awkward for a while. There's just no way that a parent and adult child can come back together after a period of estrangement and have everything be normal. Now, your kid may act normal, kind of like, hey, how you been? It's great to see you again. What you been up to? And you want to say, oh, what I've been up to is like being devastated over the fact that you haven't been talking to me for the past few years. But yeah, no.
What I've been up to is realizing that my entire life, I made it your responsibility to take care of me and my feelings. And after you chose to leave me, I spiraled, and that's your fault.
Fine, thanks. And you? I mean, it's a hard position for parents to be in. In general, though, my advice is to take them where they are. If they want to be upbeat, act like things are fine, this didn't happen or whatever, take them where they are. But they may want to talk about it. They may want to have a bunch of rules of re-engagement, which a lot of them do, as I was saying earlier. So you want to do that, meet them there as well and be open to having that discussion. If they're cautious in checking you out, then you should be somewhat cautious yourself. Don't get too far ahead of them in your mood or what you talk about. But in general, this goes to not making them feel guilty. You also don't want to act too wounded or angry about them, because that can also cause them to pull away and withdraw from you. Another thing that can be useful to do is to ask for guidance, whether you do or don't understand what happened. It may be useful, not necessarily in the first session or two, but to say something like, look, I'm very happy that we've been able to spend time together again, since I clearly did some things in the past that were upsetting to you. I'm wondering if we could make the agreement going forward that we'll try to stay current on things that are bugging either one of us that build up. Now, here I say either one of us, but it's really going to be whether anything that you do bugs them. The main point is that you're encouraging them to tell you what's.
There's a big problem here that they have when it comes to the shift in power dynamic. And I want you to think about the thing that he just said. Really, it's just what bugs them. These are people who their entire lives, the children, their entire lives have had to just be so careful in the way that they speak to their parents, because their parents will blow up on them in one way or another. Maybe it's physical, maybe it's just verbal, but these are parents who have not been able to take criticism and who, when criticized by their child, go, "What do you know? You're a kid." Or, "I'm the parent. I get to say what happens here." And so now it's the opposite. Now it's the kid has the power. The child has the power now. And if you criticize them, or if you once again do what it is that you've been doing, they have the power to leave you, and you can't handle that. You can't. It's so hard as a child to just finally give up on your parents. It is so hard. And I know too many people who should, who never will. If that's a relationship you have with your child, consider that it might be your fault. Consider that you just may not have been the best parent. Did you try your best? Maybe you really did. And it must suck so badly to realize that your best was not good enough. That's heartbreaking. Try differently.
It's bothering them, and that alone will gain you credibility and increase the chances of their communicating with you. But a lot of these kids actually don't understand why they cut off the parent, or they're worried about retriggering your feelings, or they feel guilty about it. So they don't necessarily want to have the conversation. And that's why I often encourage parents to just take the child where they are and not get too far ahead of them. Okay, finally, parents often want to know, well, how often do I have to keep apologizing for whatever mistakes that I made? And, what I say is write one really good amends letter according to the guidelines that I laid out in my webinars, which you can find on my website or email me, or maybe I've even given something like that here or will in the future if Elaine has her way. But you write one really good amends letter. And then if you get no response 6 to 8 weeks later, you write a follow-up that just says, "Hi, checking in, just wanting to see if you had a chance to review the letter that I sent to you. I'm sure there were things that I left out that would have been good to have included, but I wanted to see if there was a way to get a conversation started. I hope you'll let me know if there are things that you'd like me to work on, or if you're open to doing family therapy, I would welcome that as well. Love mom, love dad, boom, you're done. You don't feel like you have to do anything more. You don't have to keep apologizing. You did it. Now it's really in your kids' camp. If they want to be a stand-up person and accept the olive branch, then great. If they don't, then you have to stop trying and obsessing about them. You have to turn your attention and your love and your care towards yourself. And again, you have to own the narrative of what kind of a parent and person you were, and remember all the good things about you and the way that you are a good person and a good parent. And I will see you here in future webinars. Thank you for showing up.
I'm going to summarize that 70-minute video as fast as I can. From the perspective of Dr. Coleman, as a parent, I understand you are a parent and our children were wrong in this situation. The way to handle that is to pretend they were right, lie to them enough for them to come back to you, and keep lying to them to preserve the relationship. If who you are is someone that they cannot handle, that's on them. Just pretend not to be that person. Remember not to give up who you are in private, and write down your current values and uphold them. You are not a bad parent. They are bad children, but you should still want a relationship with them. You don't have to say bye to me. Consider subscribing to the channel for Toast. That's for YouTube. Consider following the Twitch channel for Toast. Look, she can't even look at you right now. All right, go. Get out of here. Bye. Are you just going to stare at me the whole time? Is this not awkward for you?